Alright, welcome back to our podcast. I'm the gentleman, accompanied by the disturbed Southern Belle.
Hello.
And in this episode, we will be continuing our most disturbing human experiment series with the monster study of 1939. So, the monster study was an experiment performed on 22 orphaned children in Davenport, Iowa in 1939. The study was conducted by Wendell Johnson, and the physical part of the experiment was conducted by his graduate student, Mary Tudor. The study was set up to test a hypothesis related to stuttering. The study was never published and was pretty much unknown until an article was published in 2001 in the San Jose Mercury News that was written by an investigative reporter named Jim Dyer.
Okay.
He not only revealed details about the experiment, but also followed up with surviving members of the study. Sadly, none of the participants in the study were told details about the experiment beforehand. The nickname Monster Study was applied to the study during the 1940s and 1950s by those who were associated with the stuttering research program at the University of Iowa. A theory about the nickname stems from reports by several peers who were horrified that Johnson had used orphaned children just to prove a hypothesis. However, others have theorized that the name came from from the children themselves being made to feel monstrous. A thesis that was written by Mary Tudor is the only official documentation or record of the study. As stated earlier, the study was conducted through the University of Iowa, which is a well-known institution for its advancements in research on stuttering. Dr. Wendell Johnson, who was a stutterer himself, created the thesis for the experiment, which was then performed by Mary Tudor. It took place at the Iowa Soldiers' Orphanage Home in 1939. So, the study had two parts. In one part, they would attempt to cause a child who had previously had no stutter to now be afflicted with one. And in the second part, they would attempt to erase stuttering in children who did have a stutter by telling them that they spoke fine. So Johnson later stated that he believed that stuttering begins not in the child's mouth, but in the parent's ear. The researchers had 4 questions when carrying out the study. For the first, will removing the label stutterer from those who have been so labeled have any effect on their speech fluency? For the second, will endorsement of the label stutterer previously applied to the individual have any effect on their speech fluency? For the third, will endorsement of the label normal speaker previously applied to an individual to have any effect on their speech fluency? And 4, will labeling a person previously regarded as a normal speaker a stutterer have any effect on their speech fluency? So initially, there were 256 children who were screened by Tudor and 5 other graduate students who would serve as judges. During the screening, they would listen to each child speak and then grade them on a scale from 1, which was considered poor, to 5, which was considered fluent. 22 subjects were then selected from the initial group. The children ranged in age from 5 to 16, and those selected and the workers from the orphanage were not told the intent of the experiment and were led to believe that the session would be a form of speech therapy to help all the children.
Right.
Among the 22 who were selected, 10 were marked as stutterers, and the remaining 12 were deemed to be normal speakers. The 10 children who had a stutter were then divided into 2 groups. Group A was the experimental portion. In this part, 5 children with a stutter were placed in the group. They were told that their speech was fine and that they did not have a stutter. Group B was considered the control group. Children who were in this group would be told that their speech is as bad as people say and receive traditional speech therapy. The 12 children who were considered normal speakers were also divided into 2 groups. Group 2A was the experimental portion of the group, and this was honestly one of the saddest parts in my opinion. The children in this group would be told that their speech was horrible, that they were also told that they were developing a stutter and one that must be corrected immediately, and for them not to speak at all unless it was without a stutter. Group 2B was the control portion of this group. and these children were told that they had no stutter, as well as being praised for their enunciation.
Right.
So during Tudor's first visit, she tested each child's IQ and also identified that they were left-handed or right-handed. This was done because at that time, there was a popular theory that stuttering was caused by cerebral imbalance.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if a person who was born left-handed but instead used their right hand, their nerve impulses would misfire, which would in turn impact their speech. However, Johnson did not believe this theory, but still had Tudor test each child's handedness. Most of the children involved in the study were right-handed, though there were left-handed children present in all test groups. The children in the group were assigned numbers, such as case number 15, experimental group 2A. The experiment lasted approximately 5 months from January to late May of 1939. It consisted of Tudor driving to Davenport from Iowa City every couple of weeks and talking with each child for around 45 minutes. She states in her dissertation that she followed on an agreed upon script, or that she followed an agreed upon script.
Right.
In her writings, she stated that she talked to stuttering children who were going to be told that they did not stutter and essentially said, "You'll outgrow the stuttering and you will be able to speak much better than you are now. Pay no attention to what others say about your speaking ability, for undoubtedly they do not realize that this is only a phase." And to the non-stuttering children who were going to be told that they did have a stutter, she wrote that she told them, "The staff has concluded that you have a great deal of trouble with your speech. You may have many of the symptoms of a child who is beginning to stutter, and you must try to stop yourself immediately. Use your willpower. Do anything to keep from studying. Don't even speak unless you can do it right."
Mm-hmm.
So the children in the experimental group of normal speakers began to respond immediately to the negative reinforcement they were receiving. After her second session with a 5-year-old, Norma Jean Pugh, or Pug, I'm not entirely sure,
Right.
Tudor wrote, "It was very difficult to get her to speak, although she only spoke very freely with the mouth before, or the month before." She wrote about another child in the group, a 9-year-old, Betty Romp, whom she practically refused to speak at all. The oldest child in the group, Hazel Potter, who was 15, was stated as being much more conscious of herself, and she talked less. All of the children that were in Group 2A's schoolwork began to drop off significantly. Or of all the children, their schoolwork dropped off. Children who were afraid to speak in class, another child, an 11-year-old, Clarence Pfeiffer, began to anxiously correct himself and told his teacher that he knew he was going to have trouble saying words before he even said them. Another child, 12-year-old Mary Korlosk, grew withdrawn. When she was questioned by Tudor if her best friend knew she was developing a stutter, Mary replied no. When asked why not, she replied, "I hardly ever talk to her." 2 years later, Mary ran away from the orphanage and ended up at the industrial school for girls.
Mm.
Sadly, the majority of the children who received negative therapy during the study suffered negative psychological effects. Some even retained speech issues for the remainder of their lives. Tudor was impacted herself by the experiment. She returned 3 times after the study concluded. She tried to provide follow-up care to the children and later wrote a letter to Johnson in which she stated, "I believe that in time they will recover, but we certainly made a definite impression on them." She attempted to reverse the negative effects that had been caused to the children, though in her letters to Johnson, she wrote that she was unable to provide enough positive therapy to reverse the effects. As stated, Johnson never published the results of the study, and it was relatively unknown to anyone who didn't know Johnson. Johnson passed away in 1965, and an article published in a 1988 issue of the Journal of Fluency Disorders suggested that the results were not published due to embarrassment over the experiment's results.
Right.
Which is fair.
I would say so.
62 years after the experiment, Jim Dyer, as stated earlier, was able to shed light on the disgusting study. He happened upon information about the study while in the basement of the University of Iowa. He was rightfully horrified when he read the study and began to reach out to test subjects to find out how they were now and how they were then,
Mm-hmm.
and how they had been impacted by the experiment.
Right.
He then compiled and released a series of articles which led to the experiment making national news. The article told of how several of the children had long-lasting psychological effects that stemmed directly from the sadistic experiment. One participant expressed her horror when she finally discovered the true reason behind the experiment. She had gone almost her entire life thinking she was a stutterer, stating that the negative feedback she had received from Tudor had also caused her to withdraw from many aspects of her life. Children of one of the subjects stated that their parent had been very quiet and self-conscious about their speech. After the release of the articles, a spokesman for the University of Iowa said that while the standards of experiments were different in 1939, the experiment was regrettable under any circumstances.
I'd say so.
Yeah, it was very disgusting.
It is.
Speech pathologists later condemned the experiment and stated that the orphans' speech and behavior were adversely impacted by the negative conditioning they had received. Other therapists felt that the study had been poorly designed and executed by Tudor. As a result, the data that was offered had no definitive proof of Johnson's subsequent hypothesis, and that the stuttering began not in the child's mouth, but in the parent's ear. So basically, that theory had no weight at all.
Right. So he just did this because he did it, pretty much.
Yeah, just because he felt like it. That's just what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, a lot of these, that seems to be what the case is. There's really
Yeah.
that ever comes of them.
And a lot of them just seem to be because they want to cause suffering.
It feels like it. In some cases, it does.
Like, particularly, this brings to mind the last episode I did about God, I forget what it's called now. I'm going to have to go back and rewatch that myself. I can't remember.
I can't think of it right now.
It's been a while since we recorded this, so. Anyways, just go check it out.
The Tuskegee experiment.
Yes, the Tuskegee experiment. That was just awful.
Right. It was bad.
But anyways, moments of stuttering did not change notably. However, moments of speech hesitations, interruptions, and non-stuttering disfluencies increased for Group 2A. Many defend Johnson. In the official apology that came from University of Iowa, it was asked not to tarnish his positive legacy over the experiment. Many claim that no harm was intended in the study, and most write-ups about him include the study as a minor point. Whatever.
Right.
The surviving children and the families of those who had passed away filed a joint lawsuit against the state of Iowa. The state attempted to dismiss the case, however, in September of 2005, Iowa's Supreme Court justices agreed that with the lower court in rejecting the state's claim of immunity and the petition for dismissal. So, yay! The advanced age of 3 of the surviving members of the experiment helped to expedite a settlement with the state. And on August 17th of 2007, 7 of the children were awarded a total of $925,000 by the state of Iowa for the lifelong psychological and emotional scars that were caused by the study. It was also revealed that while none of the children developed a stutter, they did become very self-conscious about their speech, which led them to be reluctant to speak.
I guess so. That's so sad.
It's just abhorrent,
right?
What they did to these children.
I read about that, and not people they were talking about. Like a lot of them, they wouldn't talk hardly ever. And
yeah,
it's just sad.
It's awful that children had to go through that.
Yeah, and orphan children at that. Yeah. So like they're not already suffering enough, so to speak. Then let's do this too.
Well, that's it for this episode. This particularly disturbing experiment.
It is.
Perfect fit for this series.
Definitely.
And I got a feeling it's just going to get worse from here.
It pretty much is, yes.
So we hope you enjoyed this episode. As usual, I did not. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, do all that stuff depending on whatever platform you're listening to this on.
Right.
And like I said, feel free to go back and check on that Tuskegee experiment episode. It is very disturbing.
It is.
I apologize for ever speaking about that. It is just awful.
It is bad.
I mean, Jesus, I felt bad just reading it. But, yeah, that's going to end it for this episode. And I'll turn it over to the Belle so she can tell you about hers.
We're continuing on talking about some more of the most disturbing experiments throughout history. We've already got a few up: the Little Albert experiment, the Tuskegee experiment, and we're going to have several others. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe, as we said, and don't forget to stay disturbed.